Prior to the American Revolution, settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains was off limits by rule of the British Royal Proclamation of 1763. But once American independence was established, folks flocked to the western frontier for land and opportunity. And as a result, Kentucky, once a part of Virginia, became the first state west of the legendary mountain range to be admitted into the newly formed United States of America. And it's there, in the Bluegrass State's capital town of Frankfort, nestled on the banks of the Kentucky River, where Kentucky's founding father, John Brown, would build an exquisite estate to not only call home, but to entertain many of the new American political and social elite as they traveled through the rugged terrain out west to this burgeoning frontier. Unfortunately for John Brown and his family, legend says that several of these house guests never left. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Southern Gothic. John Brown was the first senator of the new American state of Kentucky. Born on September 12, 1757, in Augusta County, Virginia, Brown's father was an Irish immigrant who had come to colonial America and built a life as a Presbyterian minister and schoolmaster. John Brown's early years were spent there, studying under his father at Liberty Hall Academy, eventually leaving Virginia to attend the College of New Jersey, or it is known now, Princeton. Unfortunately, when the Revolutionary War broke out, Brown's studies were interrupted. Family legends claim that in the following years, he had the honor of serving under both General George Washington as well as the Marquis de Lafayette in the Continental Army. However, no historical documentation exists to give credibility to this claim, and the young man's role in the conflict is now somewhat unknown. Several years later, after leaving the College of New Jersey, Brown headed back to school. This time, it was at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. There, he studied law under the tutelage of George Wythe, the first American law professor, as well as one of the 56 men to have signed the Declaration of Independence. Brown's connections to the country's founding fathers grew, and eventually he left William and Mary and gained employment at the law office of Thomas Jefferson in Charlottesville, Virginia. There, he continued his studies with the future president. But once Brown passed the bar, he moved west, across the Appalachian Mountains, to Danville, Kentucky, and quickly became a leader in the political scene there. At the time, Kentucky was still a part of Virginia, but the settlers in the region were unhappy with this relationship, so they elected Brown to represent them in the legislature. Brown took up the cause and fought to gain statehood for Kentucky, finally succeeding in 1792, making Kentucky the 15th state to join the new union. And for his leadership, John Brown was elected to serve as the state's first senator, a position he would hold until 1805. The small frontier settlement of Frankfort, Kentucky, was selected as the capital city for the new state. The town of less than 500 was nothing like the world where Brown and his soon-to-be wife Margaretta was raised. But he still decided to head there to help with the formation of the state's new government. So in 1796, Brown purchased 4 acres of land nestled on a bank along the Kentucky River and began construction on a beautiful and sophisticated 2-story brick home that would soon come to be known as Liberty Hall. The building was designed in the Federal-style architecture common on the East Coast during the era, fashioned from brick made from locally sourced clay and adorned with 5 symmetrical gables. The traditional layout featured a central hall flanked by 2 rooms on either side for dining, entertaining, and leisure. It's unknown who the architect of Liberty Hall was, but some have claimed the design was made by Thomas Jefferson himself, adapted by Brown to his own specifications. Construction was completed several years later, and in 1801, John and his wife Margaretta Mason moved into the home. The couple had married only several years earlier, in 1799. John was 42 at the time, and Margaretta was only 26. Of course, upon arriving in Kentucky, Mrs. Brown, who had been born and raised in New York, decorated her new home with the refinement of the East Coast. She imported an exquisite collection of antiques and fine furniture, brought down to the Kentucky frontier by way of the river, breathing life into this otherwise rustic life. Liberty Hall quickly became a centerpiece for Kentucky's elite, allowing the Browns to entertain hosts of influential guests, from future presidents James Monroe, Zachary Taylor, and Andrew Jackson, to the famed General Marquis de Lafayette. But the most infamous of these house guests was not of the American elite. It was a family member of Mrs. Brown's who came to visit Liberty Hall after the tragic death of the Browns' only daughter. And unfortunately for this woman, who has come to be known as the Gray Lady, her spirit never left. John and Margaretta had 5 children. Unfortunately, only 2 would live long enough to make it into adulthood. Their oldest sons, Mason and Orlando. Margaretta gave birth to her 3rd son while living in Frankfort in 1803. His name was Alfred, but unfortunately for the family, Alfred would not make it out of infancy. Almost immediately within the following year, the same tragedy occurred again when yet another newborn son would meet a similar fate. Then, in 1805, John Brown would finish his term in the United States Senate and return home to focus on local public service. Several years passed, and in 1807, John and Margaretta's first daughter, Euphemia, was born. Euphemia lived for several years, but at the age of only 7, her life came to a tragic end as well. The family was heartbroken, but the tragedies would not end there. Some legends claim Euphemia's passing prompted Mrs. Brown's elderly aunt, Margaretta Varick, to leave her home over 800 miles away in New York and journey to Frankfurt to help care for the grieving family. Others claim that the 65-year-old woman was merely visiting Liberty Hall on her way to see her son in Illinois. But for whatever the reason, the result was the same. Miss Varick, the sweet, generous old woman who had helped raise Mrs. Brown in New York, would become violently ill and die within 3 days of arriving at the family home in Frankfurt. Speculation as to the cause of her death varies, but during this time period, the journey from New York to Frankfort, Kentucky, was an incredibly treacherous one that required weeks of travel. And whether it was old age, a heart attack, or exhaustion from this 800-mile journey south, Miss Varick passed away in one of the upstairs bedrooms of Liberty Hall. The beloved aunt was laid to rest in the beautiful gardens surrounding Liberty Hall's property. But it wasn't long after when members of the family started to see apparitions of the gentle old woman still wandering freely about the home, as if she had stuck around to help her niece's family just as she had supposedly committed to in life. Mary Mason Scott was the first of the family to claim such a sighting. Scott, the great-granddaughter of John Brown, was supposedly sleeping in the upstairs bedroom where Mrs. Varick passed, when she was awoken in the middle of the night to find the apparition of a woman veiled in gray standing before her. Scott screamed, waking her brother, who quickly ran to her room armed with a shotgun. But the woman in gray had already gone. But then, for 3 consecutive nights, the apparition continued to appear. Over the years following, numerous other reports have been made. But all who have claimed to experience a sighting of this spirit, now endearingly named the Gray Lady, agree that she is a gentle and helpful spirit who watches over the house and continues to take care of its inhabitants. Miss Scott herself, the last member of the Brown family to reside at Liberty Hall, even referred to the Gray Lady as our beloved ghost. Speculation abounds as to why Miss Varick still inhabits Liberty Hall, and much of this revolves around the whereabouts of her deceased body. In 1844, the Brown family members who had been laid to rest on Liberty Hall's grounds, including both John and Margaretta, were reinterred in the newly incorporated Frankfort Cemetery. However, no headstone or grave marker exists there for Mrs. Varick, leading many to believe that the reason her spirit continues to wander the property is a 2-century-old search for her final resting place. While the legend of the Gray Lady is certainly Liberty Hall's most famed spirit, she's not the only apparition from the past to have been seen roaming the grounds of this 2-century-old home. In 1805, well before Miss Vera came to the Browns' estate, a famed Spanish opera singer is said to have traveled to Frankfurt from New Orleans to perform a concert at a nearby home. After her performance, the singer is then said to have attended a party held at Liberty Hall. But at some point throughout the night, legends claim she wandered out of the home to walk through the estate's exquisite gardens. Unfortunately, she was never to be seen again. In this part of the 19th century, Frankfurt was hardly more than a rustic frontier town, and attacks by local Native American tribes protecting their land were an all too frequent reality. So many attributed the singer's disappearance to one such attack, a violent abduction by one of these local tribes. Worst of all, her body was never found. Yet legends claim that this opera singer's spirit remained. Still wandering the gardens, often seen running with her mouth wide open as if screaming for help. But no sound can be heard emanating from it. The third and final spirit believed to wander the estate alongside the Gray Lady and this Spanish opera singer is said to be a deceased soldier from the War of 1812. In life, the man had fallen in love with a cousin of the Brown family who had been staying with them in Frankfurt. It's unknown how or when the soldier passed, but very much still in love, his uniformed apparition has been seen standing at a first-floor window, staring into the home, still searching for his long-lost lover. Liberty Hall remained in the Brown family until 1937, when the ancestors of John Brown sold the property to a local organization that would preserve the home's legacy as a historic site. As a result of this preservation, today, visitors can take tours of the home and experience the rich history and legacy of Kentucky's founding father. But the question remains, is the Gray Lady still there, wandering amongst these guests, searching for her final resting place? Or is she merely continuing to take care of the Brown family, as she had promised to do in life? My name is Brandon Scheck-Snyder, and you've been listening to Southern Gothic.
Southern Gothic is an independently released podcast with all content and music written and produced by Brandon Scheck-Snyder. To keep up with future episodes, subscribe today on Apple's podcast app, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now.